What is the relationship between the programs of study and the assessment tools you have created or used? Give a specific example.
In my philosophy, the program of studies is the objective guideline for what the students should be attaining, and the assessment tools would change based on the objective as the evaluation of the program of studies is alive and active in my classroom. There is a reciprocal relationship between the objectives and assessment. In my mind, the program of studies is like a map, whereas learning is the journey. I believe assessment must take different forms to become more accurate to measure the achievement of certain curriculum objectives. For example, if the programs of study says that my kindergarten class needs to be able to differentiate between a square, a circle, a rectangle, and a triangle, the lesson that I do would be hands-on, interactive, with formative assessment. Once I think most of my students have gotten it through demonstration, I would summatively assess them in small groups by working on building a pre-drawn picture outline of these 4 shapes. Once they've completed that, there would be a space below to draw the shape and to label it. I would keep a checklist that has E for excellent, P for poor, and O for okay, based on the student's performance. Therefore, the relationship is clearly dynamic as well as informative of my teaching methods. If I found that the students were not able to differentiate between these shapes based on my instruction, the assessment would tell me to go back to the objectives and to change my way of teaching so I could allow them to actually succeed in this area of the program of studies. This back and forth relationship between objectives and assessment ensures productive learning and thoughtful teaching practice.
Briefly describe a student you have met who struggles with self-efficacy. Now describe some specific ways effective assessments would help you to boost this student's self-efficacy and achievement, including how your assessments will inform your instruction.
There was a boy in my grade 2 practicum who refused to do any work unless there was an adult that would sit right beside him, and even when the adult did sit beside him, he rarely got anything done. So a few times I would catch him saying that he can't do it, and that he was dumb. And after observing him and talking to him, I immediately realized that it wasn't that he couldn't do the work. He was a really bright student. It was that he didn't feel like he could do the work. He was held back by his own belief in himself. I began to assess him formatively in conversation after I taught the class a lesson about regrouping with subtraction. I used creative ways to get him to look at the questions differently. For example, I got him to highlight the tens and the ones column, and then I drew a star and a check mark over the tens column and a star over the ones column. I was able to assess his understanding of tens and ones by seeing which column he highlighted when I asked him to highlight the tens column. And then when I asked him which column we need to start with, the tens or the ones, aka the check mark or the star, he was able to tell me that we started with the star, which is the ones column. Each time he got the right answer, I encouraged him and I affirmed him in his learning. This encounter has taught me that sometimes assessment has to be differentiated and specific for struggling students. This realization helps to inform how I can adapt my lesson outcomes to individualized, personal, one-on-one instruction.
What would you tell a parent complaining about provincial achievement tests? You should present a balanced view of challenges and benefits.
As with everything else, this form of testing has its challenges and its benefits. Just as you have already pointed out, this form of testing may not accurately reflect what the student knows because of other obstacles, such as how questions are worded on the test and possible test anxiety that some students may struggle with. However, these kinds of tests are not all bad, otherwise we wouldn't do them at all. Standardized tests allow for province-wide gauge of academic achievement. All students write the same tests, and if very different results exist from classroom to classroom, it allows the school to look at the teaching methods set in place and decide if there need to be any changes. I agree with you that there is far too much emphasis placed on the student when really the tests tell us more about the teacher and the school than the student. Parents, teachers, and students need to see these tests as more communicators rather than motivators and determiners of intelligence. Your concern is legitimate, but at the same time, the education system has not developed a more inclusive way to gauge standardized achievement.
What key component did you learn in this course that is essential to building best practice for assessment with students?
Over the duration of this course, my teaching pedagogy has shifted to value a more student-teacher engagement and partnership in assessment. Instead of the student handing in a piece of work and having the teacher mark it and hand it back, I would rather see teacher input all the way through and be constantly bouncing feedback and oral assessment throughout the project. This way, students are able to enjoy the process rather than being rewarded solely for the completion. It also allows for students to change and modify their work according to the feedback that the teacher gives to enhance the quality along the way. Portfolios are an excellent example of how the feedback can involve in the project itself and how students can actually be involved in assessment. They can select pieces that show their growth or achievement in certain areas and have the opportunity to write a reflection on how they think they accomplished the goal of the project. Assessment takes on a more personal approach, which empowers the students to take ownership of their learning and allots an agency that can inspire them to feel like they can change the outcome of the assessment. Therefore, the best practice of assessment to me is to engage both the student and the teacher as much as possible.